Well, actually, I have to begin by saying that what I'm not going to talk about, okay? I'm not going to talk about privacy concerns. I'm not going to talk about legal challenges or security measures or financial challenges within the administration. I'm going to talk about public policy and big data, okay? That's all. I will actually continue some of the aspects that Mateo has already highlighted in his speech. First of all, are public authorities concerned about big data? Well, somehow they are. At least if we take a look on these quotes, for example, I mean, the former head of the European Central Bank, Jean-Claude Trichet, he said, well, we felt abandoned by the conventional tools while facing the crisis. Or President Obama said, our criminal justice system is not as smart as it should be. Or at this point, we have to say, like Helen Marges, the director of the so prestigious Oxford Internet Institute, the main problem is that government has been far too slow in considering the advantages of using of big data for policymaking, okay? If we take a look on the private sector, there are examples of businesses taking advantages of big data and analytics, and they're very well documented. Even for the most conservative industries, like, for example, the legal sector. Well, I will say that you all are not probably the example of conservative people because you are here in such a disruptive event, okay? I was shocked by this, the front page of this website. This is Thomas Hostmeyer, an IP, a small boutique, a law firm in Atlanta. And when I took a look at the human resources of these people, for example, I was surprised by the fact that they say, well, we are computer engineers, we are biologists, we are chemical engineers, and at the very end of the sentence, they say, oh, yeah, and we are also attorneys, okay? And this is a law firm. Something is changing also. But even these conservative industries, like the legal sector, is taking advantage of the use of big data. And as I say, this event is an example. And many of the big data tools and techniques pioneered by the private sector, for sure, will be used by the public sector. But take a look, I have used the future tense, okay? Will have to role a play, but they're not playing a role today. And for sure, there are initiatives all around the world. For example, the digital single market, which is, I would say, the main project of the current European Commission. It does include a strategy for big data, but it's also, I have to say, that it's mainly focused on data-driven economy and not on the public sector. Or, for example, the Obama's administration initiative in 2014, that was launched in 2014, that one was focused on the public sector. Or, for example, in Australia, where there is a big data strategy for the public sector. I have to say at this point that Australia, even though it is very far away from here, is a very good country in order to take a look on this kind of initiatives. They are very good. They are very good people working on this stuff. But the main problem that we find, even in these strategies, is the Alice in Wonderland problem. This is not mine, okay? This belongs, I have to say, to Christopher Frank, who is a vice president of a very important financial firm. He says that the main problem of using the data is the Alice in Wonderland problem. I know you all for sure have read the book of Alice in Wonderland, and if not, you should read it. But at least if you all have children, for sure you have watched the movie at any time. There is a scene here where, in which Alice comes to a crossway and she meets the cat. And the cat asks her, and she asks the cat, which road should I take? And he answers, well, where do you want to go? And she says, I don't know. And then the cat say, well, then it doesn't matter. It happens the same thing with the public sector. The problem of the public sector is not about collecting data. It's not about managing data. I mean, think about, for example, tax authorities or Social Security. Do they have data? For sure, they have. Okay, I'm not going to talk about the minister. At this point, the problem is that you should ask, what do I need the data for? That's the question. The question is not about, if I have enough financial resources, if I have a tech provider that is good for the administration. The problem is what I'm going to use the data for. And does that mean that ICT have not been used by the administration? For sure, they have been used. I mean, several steps. The e-administration in order to improve the workflow, or the e-government in order to improve the relationship with citizens, or today, take a look on the electoral programs. Remember, we have elections again on the 26th of June. Take a look on the electoral programs. Everyone talks about transparency and accountability. But we have to go farther away, okay? We have to go far away, and we have to think about smart governing. You have used the word smart before in your presentation. And that's the key point. And in that kind of a smart government, big data can play a very important role. We all have heard about e-government, e-bureaucracy, e-governance, open data, transparency. Now we have to think about e-policy, which is the role that can be played by big data in policy-making process. And what does the administration need the data for? Well, I think more or less for the same things as in the private sector. I mean, to detect problems, to allocate resources, to check assumptions, to clarify choices. Any CEO in a company will more or less answer the same thing. Does that mean, because I'm being quite hard with the administration, I know, the fact is that I'm currently on leave of absence, so I can say whatever I want. But I have to say at the same time that our administrations are working hard in some areas in which big data is already playing a role, okay? For example, in health, in order to sustain the system, it is very important the use of big data, or for research. In education, well, you maybe through big data can find out why some students might drop off. You might decide about allocating some resources. Or for example, weather forecast that was used in one of the documentaries of Fernando. For weather forecast, it is very important in order to adopt decisions on policy making in the agricultural field, or for energy efficiency, or for emergency programs, for example. Also in urban mobility, smart cities. This is one of the top areas for sure. Transportation, urban planning. There are, for sure, some examples. And I don't want to run out of time because Martí has already told me that he's going to be very strict on this point. So I'm just going to give you 2 or 3 examples on some of the initiatives that we have studied in our consultancy firm due to the fact of some of our clients, okay? The first one is here in Spain. Actually, it's a very controversial project due to the fact that anything that has to do with data in the health area is problematic from a legal point of view, but probably a lot of people here know much better than I do about these problems. It's the so-called BIS Plus project. This one was launched by the health department of the Catalan government in June 2013. And what they want is to use all the data that every single day are created in the health public system in Catalonia, and to use it in order to provide the data to R&D centers in not only in the public field, but also in the private field. I have to say that this very last point is very controversial, even at political level, so I won't go deeper on this point. And what are the benefits of using this data of the health system? Benefits are for all, for citizens, because we are going to improve, for sure, the medical assistance, for R&D centers, because they will optimize the studies and the recommendations that they use to speed up, for example, some of the studies. Sometimes you need 7, 8, 9 years in order to study a determined a concrete field, and maybe you will be able to reduce it to 1 or 2 years with, through big data technology. Or and for sure, also for the health department, in order to improve the management of the system. There is another example in the public safety area. This is an initiative that was launched in the United States, in several fire departments of the United States. It's called the Smart Firefighting. I have taken the example of the city of New York. The fire department of New York has been using a computerized risk-based system that allows them to better anticipate where fire might spark, okay? The centerpiece of this system is an algorithm called FireCat, which what it mainly does is to organize the data that are provided by 5 city agencies into approximately 60 risk factors. That allows them to create a list of buildings that might be most vulnerable to fire. Actually, they are currently working on the next version of this algorithm in order to include the data from 17 city agencies and to manage approximately 7,500 risk factors. And the last example I want to use is this one of transportation and smart mobility. And I have here to highlight one of the most important points that I think that is very useful also for the legal field, is that the area of big data is a huge area for public-private partnerships, okay? Just take a look on these examples of smart cities, the Open Data Project in San Francisco, the MIT Big Data Challenge in Boston, the IBM's Smart Cities in Da Nang, Hitachi and City Management Platform in Japan. In all of them, there is a technological, a tech provider, for sure, because it's needed, even though there are public providers, but most of them are developed in a public-private partnership. The example that I took, there are a lot, okay, but I took a European example. This one is the Project Optimode in Lyon. It was launched in 2012 in order to improve urban mobility and traffic congestion, okay? The data that they use were the data provided by operators of services and networks, and also the recovery of road traffic through a system of mobile and fixed sensors. What they have achieved nowadays is the possibility of every citizen of Lyon to a sort of personalized navigator every morning in their own mobile phone. And also they have achieved an improvement of 1 hour traffic prediction, which allows the authorities of the city to, to manage the 1,500 traffic lights that they have downtown, okay? So these are good examples of the using of big data in order to improve services by the public authorities. By the way, at this point, I want to underline the fact that Spain is not that bad in the area of the smart cities, okay? We have very good examples regarding smart cities. I can say here, I can talk here, for example, about Santander or Malaga, where they are launching some of the most important projects in the field of the smart cities. And last but not least, what about the legal field? Well, I was thinking about which kind of institutions usually work with or have a direct impact in the legal area. I said, well, there are mainly 2 institutions besides the government, which are the parliament and the judiciary. I've been working as a congressional lawyer for more than a decade in the parliament. And I have had the opportunity to find out how things were changing. We today talk about, for sure, open parliament, to the reuse of data, for example, in voting, or for example, to improve the, I would say, the relationship with citizens, okay? But there's nothing about big data. You have to think at this point that usually parliamentary administrations are very, very small. So probably here there is a problem of financial challenges for this kind of institution. Nevertheless, I was thinking about the fact, for example, of law firms providing information to the MPs regarding some aspects of the main problems, for example, of interpretation through litigation, main problems of interpretation of a concrete law. Could that, for example, optimize the way the laws are approved? I'm finished. That's 30 seconds. Regarding the judiciary, well, all of you for sure have heard about the LawXnet project, the electronic notification, all the problems that they have, or about, for example, the digital files, or in the US system about the so-called electronic discovery. There are a lot of instruments, but there's a lot to do in the area of big data. And for researchers and publishers, I think that here we have very good examples. And at this point, and I will not say anything else, at this point, I have to stress, for example, the project in the UK called Big Data for Law, which is a very interesting project in order to improve the way the researchers can work through the use of big data. Thank you very much. I hope you found it interesting, and for sure, I'm open to your questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Jorge. Thank you very much for your participation. And also, probably you don't know, but the example that you put here regarding the data from all the citizens from Catalonia, the health data, that can be used, here is the lawyer that advised the government of Catalonia about that problem, that it's from over there, that he's going to be shy. Okay, some questions.
Glad I didn't say anything bad about it.
Some questions, please. Just 1 second for the audience that are online. And thank you very much for following us, okay?
Thank you. I have one question for Mateo and another one for Jorge. First, for Jorge, copyright. When you are making text and data mining, one of the barriers could be copyright, because you have to make temporary reproductions, which are not subject to any copyright exception. Currently, the European Commission is looking into this. So I would like to know if you have any estimate about what's the amount of copyrighted materials that could be subject to text and data mining in general, in the activities that could be required. And then for Mateo, when talking about data mining, I was big data. I was thinking on big data as an opportunity for regulators, for competition authorities, in order to prevent resale price maintenance, in order to prevent bid rigging just by crossing a lot of data. Yeah. So I'd like to know if this is already something that it's starting to be activated or not.
Okay. Whatever you want.
Okay. Well, regarding your question, honestly, it is very difficult to calculate. I mean, the amount of data that will be affected by the copyright issue. At this point, I have to say that, as Mateo has already stressed in his speech, regulation has to change. I mean, we have a very good example. You have used the example of the sharing economy. I mean, the regulation that we have in a lot of fields is not more useful. And at this point, for sure, there should be some exceptions through, for example, public interest, or by adopting some security or privacy measures, or by money, for example, for collecting society or for whoever is the author of the work. I don't know what will be the solution in order to improve. For sure, not be able to calculate the amount of data that will be affected by copyright, but what I'm sure is that if the public authorities need to use those kind of data and need to process those kind of data or to treat those kind of data, they will find out through legislation the way to manage it.
Yeah, many thanks for your question. Of course, big data offers possibilities in terms of market monitoring. I think in terms of public procurement, we currently have an initiative, and we are trying to obtain data from the Ministry of Public Works in order to have data about the auctions, the public auctions in public procurement. So our aim or our final goal would be to use as much data as we can obtain in order to detect or prevent bid rigging in these markets. In the enforcement side for resale price maintenance, I'm not aware of any initiative in the Spanish Competition Authority that they that's being carried in this sense. But I think it offers opportunities in terms of market monitoring and detecting collusion or bid rigging in markets. Yeah.
More questions? Yes, go ahead.
I have a question.
Just 1 second.
Yeah.
Okay.
So I like your optimism on how we should maybe free up a little bit more regulations. And I think it's kind of a stereotype that law and even the government is very slow in catching up with society. And as you say, many are outdated. The thing I see is that innovation and discovery are happening in an accelerated way. So it's getting, new things are happening faster than before. And this is going to become a huge and bigger problem than what it is now. What do you think we should do? Are you worried that if you see it bad now, I imagine it's going to get worse? So.
Yeah, of course. It always gets worse. It gets worse, I would say. Yeah, well, the principles are clear. Better regulation, efficient regulation for these markets. You have to establish restrictions of entry in case they are necessary and proportionate. Those are the principles that we defend, at least in the advocacy department of the Spanish Competition and Markets Authority. But the disalignment between regulation and innovation, I think it's a worry, and I think the public sector should adapt in order to grant efficient regulation so as to foster competition and efficient functioning of the markets. I don't know what's going to happen in the future. I know what's happening currently, that, for instance, the Spanish government is maintaining unnecessary restrictions on competition in many markets that are and constitute an obstacle for innovation and to increase the welfare of everybody, of the Spanish society. So we just do whatever we can do in order to make the government make the right decisions. However, rent-seeking activities, lobbying activities are an anesthetized fact of public policies in Spain, in many areas, in culture, intellectual property, transport, many sectors. We see that over time, restrictions and obstacles to innovation and competition are maintained contrary to any argument. So I don't know if I'm answering your question, because it's basically really the same. Like 100 years ago, when the automobile appeared in the world, the governments basically blocked the entry of this innovation, making, for instance, that these automobiles had to go with a person like in front of the automobile, so as to signal that there was an automobile there. There was no general interest behind, underlying this restriction. It was just the protection of the incumbents, which weren't as efficient as this new innovation. So we've seen this along the history, and maybe if the pace of innovation is faster today, the problem will get worse. But I don't have a solution.
May I add one thing? One of the main benefits that I think that the use of big data for public authorities will be on that point. The use of big data can speed up decisions by public authorities. When you take a regulatory process, one of the problems is the timing, because they have to make public consultation, they have to find out what's the opinion of this sector, this other sector. Through the management of big data, you can improve a lot some of these kind of projects. But still, the problem will be there, for sure. But this is a problem of, I would say, even legal philosophy, okay? I mean, from times and times, that always the law is far away behind the development of the society.
Okay, thanks.
More questions? Okay, I think that it's very important to understand that technology and the data is disrupting these kind of sectors that are regulated and that are restricted. And that it's an effect of the technology and the data. And under your point of view, here in Spain, we are poor because we have restricted markets. I understand and I assume that could be some restricted markets for health or whatever. But do you think that actually we are less competitive and we have a big problem for the next year regarding those restricted markets?
Well, in the Spanish economy, there are many markets where competition is restricted. I have talked about some of them. There are some others We could talk about universities, road fuel distribution, postal services, telecommunications, and we find unnecessary and unjustified restrictions on competition on many markets. This, of course, is decreasing general welfare, is decreasing productivity, and in the long term, productivity is, as Krugman says, is basically everything. So that has a cost. Removing those unjustified restrictions would benefit all, maybe not the incumbent operators which are privileged by certain restrictions on competition, but that would benefit all, and we would have more prosperity, which is the goal of public policies, prosperity.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for your participation.